Hello everyone, I would warmly like to welcome you to Engender's webinar this afternoon, which is Bearing the Burden, Women's Debt in the Cost of Living Crisis. My name is Lucy and I work as Engender's Policy and Parliamentary Manager. We're really grateful to all of you for joining us this Friday afternoon to hear from some brilliant speakers and engage on this important topic. We know women in Scotland are disproportionately impacted by rising poverty and deepening financial inequality. A clear example of this is the fact that women are more likely to be in debt than men, with marginalised women particularly impacted, such as disabled women, young women, Black and minority ethnic women, those experiencing domestic abuse and lone parents as examples. We wanted to create this space as a chance to build on and connect work happening across the sector to create understanding of why it is vital that we bring gender equality into the heart of how we collectively work to tackle poverty and financial inequality in Scotland. Without further ado, I'm going to pass on to my colleague Jade, who's going to take us through some housekeeping and some quick introductions. Thanks, Jade.
Thanks, Lucy. Good afternoon, everyone. Really delighted to welcome you all today. It's really fantastic to get so many people signed up to this event, so welcome. My name's Jade. I'm the Media and Comms Manager at Engender. If you've got any tech issues today, just send me a message in the direct chat and I'll do my best to help you out as soon as I can. So a wee bit of housekeeping. We have live captioning today. Thanks to Ellis for joining us. So you can access that via this QR code on your screen if you just scan that on your mobile or another device, and I'll bob the link in the chat that will take you direct to the captioning as well in a moment. We are recording today's event, so you can see and hear us, hopefully. We can't see and hear you, so it's a little disorientating if you're on this side of it. So we're not recording you, just to confirm. We're just recording the panelists, and we may take some clips of that for socials and such at a later date. We have the chat function available and the Q&A function. So please do any questions that come to mind or thoughts, please pop them in the Q&A and we'll come to that section at the end of the event. And also in the chat, just a gentle reminder that as always, we encourage respectful engagement on the topics being discussed today within the chat. You know, as much as we're excited to hear from our speakers and panelists, we're also here to connect with one another, to share our work, share links to research and reports that you're working on around the cost of living crisis. So yeah, please feel free to introduce yourself, send some links and say hi. On to our next slide. So a quick outline of what today's event will look like. We've got housekeeping just now and a quick warm-up with my colleague Lucy in a moment. We're then on to our presentations. We'll then take a 10-minute break around 12:45 and we'll come back for that Q&A at the end. So do bob your questions in the Q&A. And then at the very end, we'll have a wrap-up activity for a few moments. So really excited to introduce our speakers today. We've got a great range. Two colleagues are joining from StepChange Debt Charity. Asiya Uddin has joined StepChange Debt Charity a year and a half ago, and in her current role as Research and Insight Officer. Asiya works in the research function of the External Affairs Department and focuses on supporting the development and management of client insights and research project activities. Lawrie Morgan Klein also joined us from StepChange today and is StepChange's Scotland's Public Affairs Officer, lobbying parliamentarians and the policymakers on issues excuse me, that will make a difference to people across Scotland who are dealing with debt problem. Prior to joining StepChange, Lawrie worked as a parliamentary assistant and researcher. Jules Oldham also joins us. Jules heads up the policy team at the Scottish Women's Aid and works to help Scotland reach a point where domestic abuse no longer exists. Jules brings a wealth of experience of over 20 years with her today in the social sector and is passionate about ensuring policy and legislation is ambitious and translates into real practical change. She wants to see a world where everyone enjoys their human rights and aspirations. And our final panelist today is my colleague, Lucy Hughes. Lucy is Engender's Policy and Parliamentary Manager. She leads on all of our strategic activity with the Scottish and UK Parliaments and supports the advocacy of Engender's policy positions and research to create policy and practice change in Scotland. Those are all of our introductions just now. I'm going to pass over to Lucy, who's going to take us through our Menti activity. So the details are just up here on the screen, so you can scan that QR code to access Menti, and we'll pop the link in the chat as well. Lucy, over to you when you're ready.
Thanks so much, Jade, and to all of those joining, welcome and thank you for joining us. We're just going to do a very quick bit of participation. Obviously, we can't see and hear from you, so this is a way that you can get involved and participate a little bit in the session today. So if I could ask you, that's brilliant. Thank you, Jade. I'm just going to share my screen to the Menti and see if people have managed to log on to it. And we're just starting off with a very simple question of whereabouts in the country have you joined us from today? So it could be city, could be country you're from. It can be as specific as you want. I'm actually in Leeds today. Usually I'm Glasgow based, but I'm staying with a friend. It's a little bit different than usual. I've just made that full screen as well. Fab. So we've got quite a range, got Borders, Glasgow, Glenrothes, Edinburgh in the sunshine. That's very nice. I've got quite a cloudy day outside for me. So I think we've managed to get most people on, about 17 responses now. If you can't find the link, just go to the chat function. You can open it up from there. By the sea, we're quite jealous of that. Right, what we'll do is we'll try the next question, which is another nice and simple one. What type of organisation have you joined us from? So it could be the topic that you work on. It could be, whether in the public sector, private sector. If you want to share what kind of organisation you're from today, we can see the range of people that have joined us. Public sector, charity. You can also say what your charity works on, if you want to share that. Third sector interface, debt advice, employability, working with lone parents, housing and homelessness. Fantastic. We've got a real range of people that have joined us. Thank you so much for coming along. Brilliant. And then we've got a little bit more of an reflective question, and we wanted to ask this question to all of you and see how you rate it. So you can move the screen in your answer to whether you agree or disagree. And this is anonymous. We're not going to know who you are. So you can be as honest as you want to be. But the statement is, I feel confident on how to link gender inequality to work on poverty. So we're just kind of getting a sense of the room. How familiar are people with this topic? And how confident do you feel coming into the session? So got quite high confidence, 3.9 average. Still a few more responses to come in. And if we get time, hopefully we can ask you again at the end of the session, but we'll see how we go. And those just joining us, if you want to participate, the Menti link is just in the chat function. Or people that have voted on that.
Sorry, Lucy, we just lost you for a second there.
Oh, am I back?
You're back. Yeah, you're back for me. Yeah, not for Jules, so hopefully you're back for everyone. Yeah.
Sorry about that. And just let me know if my internet at any point goes out. Tech issues with webinars. So I was just saying we've got a solid 3.8 there, which is a pretty strong score coming into this. So I'm expecting loads of really good questions in the Q&A. And then this is an open answer one. So if you want to share, just again, if you've got familiarity of the issue, let's say you're working in this area, what are the causes of women's debt? We just wanted to get a sense of the room, the virtual room, of what people's kind of first impressions are of the issue that we're going to be focusing on today. So men, it's quite general, but it's one of the causes that's been shared. Patriarchal policies that assume men represent society as a whole. So yeah, that biased nature, poverty, systemic inequality. A lot in there, lone parents, gender inequality, the parental burden, violence against women and girls, misogynistic systems. Yeah, patriarchy, the motherhood penalty, low pay, caring responsibilities, and unpaid child support. We will be talking about all of those things today. Capitalism, yeah. The real range. And it just shows that we've obviously already got quite a lot of understanding for people that have come along, which is great. And hopefully we'll be able to, again, so thank you for humouring me with that and having a go using the Menti. It's always a little bit of an experiment to see how these things are going to work online, but we will get a chance to come back to that after we've heard from our brilliant speakers. So I'm going to hand over to Asiya now to start us off with a presentation from StepChange. So Asiya, if you're okay to share your slides, and we'll get going.
Thank you, Lucy. Yep, I'll get my slides up. Hopefully you can see that. Can you see my slides? Yeah, perfect.
Yep, that's great.
So firstly, I'm going to hand over to my colleague Lawrie to give us a bit of background on StepChange in Scotland. So over to you, Lawrie.
Thanks, Asiya. Just a brief word about StepChange and who we are and what we do. So we're a free debt advice charity. So we provide support across the United Kingdom via telephone and our online service. We've been going for over 30 years. And in Scotland, we help around about 40,000 people annually. The majority of our clients are women. So 63% of the clients who come to us for advice are women. And our head office is based in Leeds. Lucy, you have to pop in while you're down and say hello to our colleagues down there. But our Scotland team is based out of Glasgow, and we have about 65 or so advisors who are based there, who are our statutory team. So people who work on the debt arrangement scheme, bankruptcy, and we also have a welfare benefits team and an advocacy team to provide that extra support for clients that need it. And we have clients, we've got a spread right across the entire geography of Scotland. We've got clients that live in every local authority and every parliamentary constituency. It kind of reflects, I guess, the huge challenge with problem debt. And my colleague Asiya has worked on a fantastic report. I think naturally the nature of what we do as money advisors, we look at what a client's got coming in, what's coming out, and we advise them on the best ways forward. That's sort of the very basic description of what money advice is, and we can help that client get set up on a solution. But naturally, a big part of having that kind of in-depth discussion with an individual about their finances is a huge amount of data. And in aggregate, obviously, we have this immense kaleidoscope of information about what financial difficulty looks like across the UK and in Scotland. And my colleague Asiya has recently worked on a fantastic report called Bearing the Burden, which looks at women's stories with that specifically. So taking that thread out of the kaleidoscope and addressing that specifically. And it's sort of work that we're starting to do more. Asiya, and we have a small team in our research insight. We've got Asiya and our colleague Josie, who are both fantastic. And also, and I said to Asiya that I would do this, so she said she would cringe, but I'm going to get away with it. She's also received an award internally. We have an award that is named after a previous chief executive within the charity called the Engender Award. And Asiya last week received that reward for the work that she's been doing over the past year. And I think this report is just a brilliant example that allows us to tell the story of people in problem debt. So Asiya, I hope I didn't make you blush, but back over to you to delve into that.
Thank you, Lawrie. Cringe slightly, but we'll crack on. Thanks. So yeah, as Lawrie mentioned, we published a report called Bearing the Burden, Unravelling Women's Debt Dilemma, and we published this around 6 months ago. And the report dived into the experiences of women in the UK dealing with financial difficulty against the backdrop of the cost of living. And here we just really wanted to highlight how the gendered picture of debt differs and bring attention to the disproportionately negative impact that this is having on women. And today I'm going to walk through some of the insights from that report, but through a Scottish lens, comparing data from the first half of 2022 to the first half of 2023, which is about 2,500 to 3,000 clients or so. But before I jump into the Scottish insights, I just wanted to touch upon the concept of intersectionality. I have a definition up there on the slides, which you can take a few seconds to read. So our research bearing the burden showed that overall women are experiencing financial difficulty. However, the extent to which they experience this really differs based on how different factors compound, which can be highly nuanced. And it is an area that we want to understand and do further research on, as Lawrie mentioned, because as our report showed, certain groups of women are open to more financial difficulty than others. So from our UK research, it showed that single parents, women from minority ethnic backgrounds, and women with vulnerabilities are more likely to experience financial difficulty. And we've dissected our Scottish data to look at a few socioeconomic factors, such as family composition. However, it's not possible to delve into all the socioeconomic factors that we looked at the UK level, just because of small base sizes. So to kick us off, the first thing I'm going to look at is the cost of living's disproportionate impact on women from a Scottish perspective. So in the past few years, there have been periods of economic uncertainty for households in the UK and Scotland specifically, which have been marked by events such as the COVID-19 pandemic, surging costs of living, such as rising energy costs and rising interest rates. And our client data showed a notable shift in the proportion of Scottish women seeking debt advice in the last few years. So as Lawrie mentioned earlier, around 60% of our client base was women, but in the first half of 2023, we saw this increase to around 62%. And I think this uptick really signifies a growing demand for financial support among women. And what's been particularly striking is the parallel surge that we also saw in the proportion of women citing a cost of living increase as their primary reason for debt. So if you look at the chart on screen, you can see that in 2022, around 13% of Scottish women cited a cost of living increase as their main reason for debt. And fast forward to 2023, it has more than doubled to 28%. And also between that same time period, we've seen the gap between women and men citing a cost of living increase as their main reason for debt widen from around 2 percentage points to around 8 percentage points. So it's quite clear that the cost of living increase is leaving a substantial debt on Scottish women's finances. At StepChange, another identifier of financial difficulty among our clients is whether they have a negative budget. And a negative budget describes a situation where a client's essential monthly expenditure exceeds their monthly income after they've proceeded through our debt advice and budgeting process. And our data here shows that women are more likely than men to have a negative budget post-advice. And year on year, we have seen the gender gap between women and men in Scotland with a negative budget widen from around 1 percentage point to around 3 percentage points, with around 36% of women having a negative budget in 2023. Also in 2023, not only did we see more women with a negative budget, but we also saw a whopping £20 year-on-year fall in the average monthly surplus for women. And the monthly surplus or deficit is the amount of the amount of money clients have to pay towards their debts from their income once all of their essential monthly costs have been budgeted for. So the monthly surplus now stands at £26 for women. And to put this into perspective, this is around £51 lower than the corresponding figure for men, which is £77. And if you look at the chart, you can also see that men saw their average monthly surplus increase by £13 year on year, whereas women saw quite a substantial fall. So with more women having a negative budget, this is particularly problematic because it means that they have limited options when it comes to finding a debt solution, such as some form of debt repayment plan, as they're only considered to work if a client has enough money to pay towards their debts after their essential costs have been budgeted for. So in turn, women face a more challenging journey to becoming debt-free. So on the cost of living, I'm now going to turn our attention to monthly expenditure patterns. So women's monthly expenditure levels are only marginally higher than men. So it's around £1,470, which is only £9 higher than the monthly expenditure among men. And we know that women are more likely to have a negative budget and have a lower amount of money to pay towards their debts. And these financial challenges have unsurprisingly translated into struggles with keeping up with essential household bills, most notably energy bills. When we delve into energy bills in a bit more detail, we see that women spend around 18% more than men on energy each month, which is around £34 more. And another essential expenditure item which we delved into was food. And we saw that women spend around 12% more than men on food, which is around an additional £35 per month. So with these expenditure disparities between women and men, we can see that women face a greater financial squeeze. So some of the insights that I've touched upon tie in with some of the structural drivers which potentially contribute towards women's higher susceptibility for debt problems, which I'm now going to go into in a bit more depth. So I think when Lucy was doing her Menti poll, a few people mentioned childcare, which is one of the sort of obvious things that we also looked into. So we picked out childcare as we saw that women were more likely than men to have dependent children. And among our Scottish clients, women were around 3.5 times more likely than men to be single parents. And they headed around 9 in 10 single parent households. We saw in the previous slides that women have slightly higher expenditure levels, which may partly be explained by childcare responsibilities. And this is irrespective of the fact that both men and women have an average of 2 children. And staying with our childcare stats, due to some low base sizes in our Scottish data, I'll be referring to trends in our UK data on childcare costs, specifically as they'll have quite similar patternings to our UK data. So interestingly, our UK data showed that it is women who spend more and a higher proportion of their income on childcare costs when compared to men, which equated to an additional £655 per year for women. So now that we've looked a bit at the expenditure patterns of our Scottish clients, I'm now going to turn our attention to incomes, and we see some disparities emerge here, which I'm sure isn't surprising to any of us. So the average income for women in the first half of 2023 was slightly lower than that of men, and year on year they saw a slightly smaller uplift in their income when compared to men. When we delved into the employment status of our clients, we saw that women were less likely to be in full-time employment and more likely to be in part-time employment when compared to men, which may partly explain the lower income that we see among women. However, when we looked at the income of women and men in full-time employment alone, we saw that women's income was still lower, and the income gap between women and men in full-time employment has widened from around £24 in 2022 to around £119 in 2023. So with us seeing more women having a lower income compared to men, this makes it more difficult for women to recover from debt problems, which tend to be exacerbated by a lower income. So staying with income not only includes money from paid work, but also includes money from benefits such as universal credit. And in the first half of 2023, we saw that around 37% of Scottish women were in receipt of universal credit, which is quite a stark contrast to the 25% of men. Additionally, a notable proportion of women's income was made up of universal credit payments rather than earnings from paid work. So around 47% of women's income was made up of universal credit payments in 2023, whilst the corresponding figure for men was around 37%. But we know that even with universal credit in place, many women still face a shortfall in covering the cost of their essentials, such as energy bills, and universal credit is not enough to bridge that financial gap for them. So just a final few concluding remarks from me. So our Bearing the Burden report highlights some of the many challenges women face when dealing with their debt and finances. And it really just hones home how important it is for women's financial well-being to be prioritised with appropriate support to try and reduce the harm that debt causes, especially against the backdrop of rising living costs. The insights that I've shared with you today show quite a few worrying trends, and a one-size-fits-all approach will not suffice. And in an ideal world, we would have tailored interventions, informed policies, and broader societal changes would be needed to help women navigate debt and the cost of living. That takes me to the end of my slides. Thank you for listening to our insights, and I hope you found them interesting. I believe I'm handing back to Lucy.
Thanks so much, Asiya, and thank you for a fantastic presentation. Such a lot of detail in there and statistics, which I know many people will be interested in. And I think also just how contemporary that is, that data, stuff that we don't have access to a lot. So it's super useful to hear from you, and thank you for that. I'm going to pass over to Jules now, if you're able to share your screen, Jules, with your slides, and I'll hand over to you. Thanks so much.
This is where you hope everything does the right thing. Is that working? And are we from the beginning? Okay, is that working? Are we good? Can I get a wee thumbs up and know that I'm, yeah, brilliant, thank you. Okay, well, thanks for inviting Women's Aid to be a part of this. It's one of these sessions that Lucy mentioned a wee while ago, and I was like, oh, yeah, this is sounding really good. So hope everybody else is just as enthusiastic on it. Scottish Women's Aid, I should probably do a little blurb on that, in that we are not a frontline service, but we work with women's aids across the country. We're kind of more the kind of geeky back end to the sector, and we input to policy, we provide training, we collate lots of thoughts and ideas from our members across the nation, and then input those into the policy landscape. So for today, gender, financial inequality and domestic abuse, this is a massive subject, and this could actually be an entire year's worth of webinars, I would say. So I've focused in on a couple of elements. Please don't think that this wee circle here is kind of an exhaustive list, because it's really not. It's a starting point of some of the elements that fall into this. So economic abuse and financial abuse in particular, I'll hone in on a bit, but I think it is worth saying, as has just been kind of highlighted in terms of the access to childcare and the importance around that, and where that is a real issue, the labour market inequality, how that sits, and how that sits in terms of our kind of welfare system and the inequalities on that too. If we consider something that the UN said in terms of our welfare system, they said if a misogynist was to describe or design a welfare system, they would come up with universal credit. So that's a great starting point. I say that very sarcastically, but we've moved very much from a household, from a person-led system, which really we've had all issues there already. But then when we move that over to being a household system, it's fairly disastrous in terms of domestic abuse and that inequality, and kind of allows so much to be hidden within the system itself. I've popped at the side there, and I really want this to be absolutely clear from this this presentation, that poverty is not the kind of cause though of domestic abuse, and that's absolutely not what we're saying here. What is the case though is that poverty can really become, and financial inequalities can really prevent people from moving out of those relationships. And be it, that doesn't even mean to be moving from a home, but moving from a relationship. That's where the issue, and where the financial element really becomes an absolute problem. So please don't be thinking we are definitely not saying poverty causes domestic abuse. We are saying financial inequality makes that move from domestic abuse much more difficult. But overall, it's a really tangled web in terms of all of this. I have to be very upfront here. I tried to do some sort of flowchart of how it all came together, and there was so much that comes into the interwoven elements of all of this, that I would just say that kind of all the elements of domestic abuse, when then layered to gender inequalities, when then layered into the kind of financial elements of that, there's just all very interlinked. So a flowchart is pretty difficult. But what might help you to kind of see where the picture lies is to also start by outlining where domestic abuse is within Scotland. So for now, this is a stat that's just come out from the Police Scotland, where almost 62,000 incidents were reported by Police Scotland. And I would really highlight that these are the incidents that have been actually recorded. Think how difficult that would be to make that call, or you might have even made it yourself, to report that incident about yourself or about a friend, a relative, or a neighbour. So that's just kind of that really just those incidents themselves rather than the broader picture. When we look at domestic abuse at the broader picture, 1 in 4 women will experience domestic abuse, and 1 in 5 kids have lived with domestic abuse. So this is a massive figure in terms of sort of society and where we're living just now. It does take on average 7 attempts to leave an abusive relationship. So there's also all the ins and outs of that. When we're looking at the financial issues here, that could be somebody starting from scratch and then and then returning and then starting from scratch again. And then there's an awful lot of navigation of really difficult systems that become even more difficult when you've tried to leave and return. And to the point where somebody has left an abusive partner, that's where things become at the most heightened risk. And on average, 2 women a week are killed by a current or former partner as a result of domestic abuse. So that's the picture in Scotland just now, and it really is a vast picture. So when we're talking about this, we need to consider how how many people this really impacts. We've got some of the best legislation across the world, really, in terms of domestic abuse, and that's brilliant, but it's not all maybe kind of working so well in reality. So I would say that is just to be aware of that. But where we have gotten to is we're not just considering domestic violence and the violence element of it, not to undermine that and by any means, but we consider domestic abuse much more as the entire behaviour rather than a one-off incident. So when we're looking at financial abuse and economic abuse, that makes it much easier to consider that, because a lot of this is long-term behaviours. So somebody within financial abuse controlling finances over a long length of time rather than that one-off kind of incident. So what do we mean financial abuse? Well, in terms of the sort of financial versus economic, the financial is really where it is the absolute, just the sort of money side of things. So you might have somebody who has applied for credit. So a perpetrator applying for credit without a victim knowing, and this debt kind of being accrued over a period of time. If you think how you can do that on just even from your mobile without somebody knowing, as long as you know their details, a lot of debt can be accrued without somebody knowing, or somebody could be persuaded to kind of accrue that debt on somebody else's behalf. The checking of receipts, the checking of kind of what's going in and out of the account and all that kind of side of control, that comes under financial abuse. No access, never being given access to passwords for accounts. And at times, Amina were talking about a really interesting report only yesterday where just women having no access to money whatsoever. So never mind having poor access to money, but no access, and therefore also no paper trail and no kind of digital kind of presence in life. A wee case example there, very much a real case. A husband and wife were working for the same business, and the husband was paying his wife every week a salary, but that salary was around £20 a week. Didn't even sort of stay at the same amount week on week, week in, week out, and it was a bag of coins handed over to his wife, the victim. So, that the degrading element of that, but also the kind of what do you do with that? That there's no paper trail, there's nothing. So all quite pretty difficult in terms of reality and moving on, and kind of what do you do from there. Economic abuse is much more the kind of broader sense of that. So it could be somebody also insisting maybe they're saying that they will always drive you to your work every day, or because you're not to go and transport yourself, or really controlling the sort of technology around the house and clothing, all those kind of things. That all comes into economic abuse. Pause for a wee second and think, wonder, you've seen those big figures. How vast is this? What sort of percentage? 95% of domestic abuse cases, now you've seen the numbers that we're talking about already, are impacted by economic abuse. So this is big numbers in terms of the people who are really at risk. And in terms of the long-term impacts, well, again, this list could go on forever, but it's kind of not having the money to start from scratch. I've touched on, you know, not having that digital footprint, trying to get a bank account set up with no ID, leaving with large amounts of debt, housing arrears, maybe no credit history or nothing at all to kind of base anything on. That's a really difficult starting point. Especially when you then add that to the StepChange information we've just heard about the costs and kind of the inequality and what's coming into your bank accounts if there is something there. No references, just some, you know, for to actually be going for a new tenancy or applying for a mortgage. There's nothing to base things on, and too often there would need to be sort of bankruptcy or sort of similar moves in terms of that for women. Then picking up the pieces for debt that they've not even known about in the first place. And another example of this taking place would be recently we heard of a couple again working together. They had a housing development company, and where the husband was basically buying property on behalf of both for the business, and then taking all the equity out without his wife being aware of that whatsoever. That's a really difficult kind of web to untangle. You've got also the scenario where we've got increases in many rents and things and fixed rates just now in terms of your mortgage. So we have many cases where a husband is saying no to going for a better rate, and so a woman's left with a property that she can no longer afford simply because that interaction with the bank isn't happening. So massive challenges, and it really is across all elements of systems. Domestic abuse is a cause and consequence of inequality, gender inequality, though, so we really need to consider that when we're thinking of the solutions. Long-term change across that tangled web is really needing that sort of societal gender change, and then to impact that in terms of the system changes. So I hope that's been helpful. Thank you very much for listening.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Jules. That was an excellent presentation. I think gave us a really strong overview of the work that Scottish Women's Aid do on this area. As Jade has put in the chat, please ask any questions in the Q&A as you've been hearing from our brilliant speakers. What we're going to do actually just time-wise is take a 10-minute break just now so that our captioner can have a hand break and gets a little bit of a rest, and then we'll come back. If I could ask you to be back with us at 12:48. I'll be doing the last input and then we'll go into a Q&A session. So thank you so much, and we'll see you in 10 minutes. Thanks, everyone.
Hello.
Hello again. I think we'll just wait for people to come back in. I did give people 1 more minute till 12:48. I was quite exact, but I'll get going, I think, as soon as we get there. So I'm just going to do a quick 10 minutes from Engender, and then we'll head into our Q&A. So Jade, if you're able to share the slides, that'd be fantastic. Thanks everyone, and welcome back if you're just joining us again. Hope you managed to grab a cup of tea, take a little screen break. We're just going to dive back in and I'm going to present on some of Engender's work related to the cost of living crisis. So why is the cost of living crisis a crisis for women's equality? What I'm really going to do with this last input and last session of people talking at you will be to bring together some of the themes we've heard already related to women's disproportionate levels of debt, which StepChange have made really clear from the research they've done in their own client data. Also the direct consequences, obviously we've heard from Jules, how this relates to women's experiences of domestic abuse and exacerbates lots of the existing issues around that area. So I hope the key message you can take away from the next 10 minutes is that applying a gender lens is vital when designing solutions to poverty and the cost of living crisis in Scotland. But also there are some really useful steps to follow when approaching this work that can be really helpful to do this and to make sure that it's done meaningfully so that we see solutions which really address gender inequality as part of this work. So it's a bit of a whistle-stop tour. Like Jules said, when covering some of the structural issues, I'm not able to cover everything in such a vast topic, but I've also put some sources together, which we'll send round after the webinar. And please share any research or links that you have from your own organisation into the chat function, so we can create a bit of information sharing throughout this as well. So next slide, please, Jade. Thanks very much. So who we are, Engender is Scotland's feminist membership organisation. We have a vision for a Scotland in which women and men have equal opportunities in life, equal access to resources and power, and are equally safe and secure from harm. We've worked in Scotland for 30 years to advance equality between women and men, producing research, lobbying decision makers, and empowering women to campaign for change. As part of this, we work alongside our sister organisations on many areas related to women's financial inequality, such as social security policy, access to work, valuing care work, and actively lobbying to create an economy that works for women. In October 2022, we released the report you can see a picture of there, which brought together key themes showing the gendered impact of the cost of living crisis, which very much has not gone away, as we've seen from Asiya's presentation on the stats from last year, and also how this relates to existing inequality for women in Scotland, of which these unmanageable levels of debt are one of the symptoms. So next slide, please. So I think it's really important to go back to why are we talking about this? Why talk about gender inequality? The backdrop we have is that we need to be proactive in bringing gender into our work on poverty by recognising and addressing in our responses that there's this existing financial inequality that exists for women in Scotland. And this means that when any kind of economic crisis comes along, or increase in the cost of living, it means that they're at the sharp end of these crises. And women's inequality in Scotland has been compounded by over a decade of austerity policies. For example, that graphic there shows that it's estimated 86% of cuts to social security between 2010 and 2020 will have come directly from women's incomes. The pandemic then hit Scotland and created further rollbacks and hard-won progress on gender equality. We're also working in a context where there's a lack of historic data gathered that is sex disaggregated, and which takes limited account of gender. Solutions and responses as a result have historically not been designed with women's specific circumstances in mind. And even rarer is access to intersectional data and research. We know women aren't a homogenous group and they experience their inequality differently, related to other forms of marginalisation, which we have to actively address. Ultimately, everyone working on these issues, which are so important to us, such as tackling poverty and inequality, want to make the biggest impact. However, our understanding is that if we don't design our responses with gender inequality in mind, then policies will fail, as inequality is firmly baked into our systems due to historic gender bias and assumptions that prioritise men's behaviour. And the fact that women are often absent from the most powerful decision-making positions, especially marginalised women. Also, from a do no harm principle, when making policy, incorporating gender equality into the work helps avoid unintended consequences. Even if you're coming to it with good intentions, not thinking about these things could actually do more harm than good and deepen gender inequality or create harm. Next slide, please, Jade. So integrating gender into the work, as a process, we're keen to demystify some of this. When you talk about gender analysis, it can sound really complicated. It doesn't need to be. And much of it relates to asking the right questions when designing a piece of work or research, or even thinking about the problems that you want to tackle, whether you're working in government, service delivery, in the third sector. And it's, that could be, you could come at this from so many different ways. So the first step that we look at is really identifying what are the differences between men and women's experiences, for example, in the cost of living crisis. So this is about looking at what's the data and research that we do have, which does look at gender and other forms of marginalisation, which is even rarer to find that a lot of the time. Are there differences in how women and men are benefiting or not benefiting from the budgets we're setting, the investment that we're seeing? And identifying the disproportionate debt that women are experiencing, as StepChange have done in that work, is a good example of this and helps us understand who is being impacted by poverty. Data can come in lots of different forms as well. It's not just about statistics, but actually what are you seeing frontline in your services? What are your clients saying to you, the women that you're meeting through the work that you're delivering? How can you work with them to understand their experiences and identify what their needs are? So it doesn't need to be these kind of huge research studies. They could literally be doing a focus group or a survey with the women in your community. And then it's about asking, why is it different? And that's some of the things I'm going to cover in a little bit of a summary in a moment. So this is where the analysis comes in, and we go beyond just counting women, but actually asking why these groups, why women? And it helps us ask and look at how gender roles directly shape experiences of poverty, such as women's roles as carers, domestic labourers, and household managers. And also, as Jules has just gone through in her presentation, their experiences of economic and domestic abuse as well. That's just some examples. And it's important to cover here the why is so it's so key to take an intersectional approach for this. Gender is one aspect which influences women's lives, and then many other things such as immigration status, as we've mentioned earlier, which will impact women's lives alongside the gender inequality that they experience. And then what needs to change as a result? So the list there are things that we lobby for Scottish Government to change. So that's looking at sort of data, different kind of competence that our decision makers have to look at gender. But this can come in lots of different forms in terms of, making sure our asks are really tackling gender equality and prioritising that. Sharing best practice at local level, if there's a gender service, really shouting about where it's worked for women. That can be something that is, a part of the work once you've identified these different issues, and make sure that others are learning from that and really kind of implementing the best approaches for women across whatever it is that the areas that you're delivering and working on. So to the next slide, Jade. Brilliant. So why do women pay the biggest price? I'm just going to fly through these, but crisis of incomes, we've already heard about some of this in previous presentations. There is a very little safety net for many women due to a chronic lack of financial resources compared to men, and they're often overrepresented in low-income households. We've got the persisting gender pay gap in Scotland, with women more likely to be in insecure, lower paid and part-time work. As an example, women make up 60% of those who earn under the living wage, and there are significantly wider pay gaps for Black and minority ethnic women and disabled women as well. This means that there's often less access to savings and access to pensions than men. Latest figures suggest that women would need to work on average 19 years longer than a man to have the same pension on average. This lower income and savings means higher vulnerability to being unable to meet rising everyday costs or deal with the impact of inflation, as we've seen in the last few years. So next slide. Closely related to this is the impact of paid and unpaid care and household labour on women's lives. So paid and unpaid care work are chronically undervalued by our society and in our economy. Women shoulder the majority of caring responsibilities, and this intrinsically shapes their lives, whether that be managing households, housework, or childcare. These are deeply entrenched patterns in the way that women and men's time is spent across Scotland. It's estimated up to 70% of unpaid care for disabled and older people, as an example, is carried out by women in Scotland, with women twice as likely to give up paid work to carry out unpaid care. We also know that unpaid carers are much more vulnerable to poverty. So all of these things are starting to link in terms of creating barriers to women's financial equality with men. And of course, we've covered a little bit on childcare, but childcare costs are still incredibly difficult to meet and create active barriers to paid work for women. Next slide. And as a consequence of this, again, we've touched on universal credit briefly. Due to carrying out these caring roles and having lower incomes, women are twice as likely to rely on social security. And as we know from working in this space, the kind of ability for social security to meet people's needs in the cost of living crisis is becoming harder and harder, as they're not always meeting, not going up with inflation, not meeting the actual costs that people need to cover in their everyday lives. We also have the UK's universal credit system. Jules kind of referenced this already. It's inherently misogynistic in design and actively works against women's inequality, which has been recognised at United Nations level. Elements such as the benefit cap impact single parents most severely. 92% of them are women. It actively doesn't recognise the unpaid work that women carry out. And other aspects such as the two-child limit means women have to justify their family circumstances, and this particularly impacts women who are likely to have 3 or more children, for example, from certain faiths or ethnic minority communities, creating further layers of discrimination. And the payment of universal credit as a single household payment is an issue that we've worked on for many years alongside Women's Aid and others, which undermines women's rights to an individual income. And as you know, as Jules has pointed to, there's huge risk for women in terms of their experience of domestic abuse and financial control within the household. Next slide. So just to finish off, I'm keen not to chat too much longer, but what we've seen is from current research, whether that's StepChange's contemporary data they've looked at, or this piece of work has been done by the National Advisory Council for Women and Girls, who carried a bit of work in 2023 to look at surveying women and understanding how the cost of living is still impacting on them. And I'm not going to go over all of this, but these issues aren't going anywhere, and they are increasing in terms of severity and how they're impacting women's everyday lives, whether that's struggling to meet energy, food, transport and housing costs, socialising less, having to cut back on other aspects of spending, and also being household managers of poverty. So we see that a lot in terms of being shock absorbers and having to kind of skip meals or take cuts in other ways as part of managing a household budget. So moving on to the next slide. And finally, it's really important that we always look at the intersectional experiences within this. So I've already pointed to a few different groups that are impacted in particular ways, but work being done by Carers Scotland on female unpaid carers, work from Glasgow Disability Alliance and the Scottish Women's Budget Group, we're seeing continually that there are groups of women who are more marginalised within the cost of living crisis within Scotland. Disabled women, for example, have higher day-to-day costs because of higher energy needs and cuts to social care packages and funding for social care. And again, we continue to see huge disparities for Black and minority ethnic women with in-work poverty levels and also access to the job market and kind of higher paid work as well. So what I'll finish off with is just some solutions. So we've gone over the areas that you need to look at if you're trying to approach this within your own work. But I also didn't want to kind of end on a note of there's nothing we can do within Scotland. And these are just some of the calls that us and many others across the sector have looked at. There's loads more in addition to this. But if you're going to take away some kind of actions from today, it would be to support these calls for the Scottish Government to kind of look at different aspects of what we can do here, whether that's the Scottish Welfare Fund, targeting that towards carers, and also things like non-residential social care charging. These things have a hugely gendered impact. So joining the dots up and actually building a broad base of support for these asks means that politically it stays a priority. We have commitments on many of these things, but we need to keep pushing to see the reality of that change. So I'll finish up there and I'll hand back over to Jade, who's going to take us through a little bit of a Q&A. Thanks so much.
Lovely. Thanks so much, Lucy. That was fab. Let me just pull up some Q&As. So please do bob any questions you might have into the chat and we'll feed them in as we go. I won't put one of our panelists on the spot to begin with, so everyone can relax. We'll have an open question for us all, I think, or a few to begin with. So first question, it's quite a large question. It's from Lila from Save the Children. How can we work together in Scotland to sustainably reduce the gendered impact of poverty and poverty itself? So how can we work together in Scotland to sustainably reduce the gendered impact of poverty and poverty itself? A big question, and definitely a few things that come to mind for me from the presentations today, but I'd love to hear what you think in response to that question. Open floor, whoever would like to pick up the mic.
I'll have a go. Well, for me, and this is maybe partly because this is where StepChange are kind of coming from at the moment. We're that niche specialist. We provide debt advice and we refer out for other support services that are best suited to a client. And I think the best way we work together, first of all, is things like this, like bringing different strands together so we can see we can provide that evidence base almost. Well, this is actually what the broad experience is for women and how it compares to men who are also in problem debt. And I think that can be really helpful. So I think it's something that I would like us to do more. StepChange is bring together more of those threads and work in partnership more. And I think it's been great to hear Jules' presentation and Lucy's presentation about that. And it's got me reflecting on some specific trends within the debt advice sector that we need to think about. So that's council tax enforcement. Women are more likely to be in arrears with their council tax. And that's something that the way the enforcement works on council tax too, if you're in a house, it's a jointly and severally liable debt. So in a case of a relationship breakdown, might be one individual in particular who ends up as head for the council tax arrears on that, and the penalties for being behind in council tax can be really difficult. That's why it's such a common arrear type for people in problem debt. So that there's so much that I think that we can begin to thread together some of these stories, and I think that's, to my mind, that's one of the kind of initial things we need to do, because it goes back to this. It's a standard point. Each of us on our own speaking about these issues, we're going to be quieter than all of us together. And I think when we come together and demonstrate where there's problems that need addressed and where things need to change, that's always a stronger argument.
Yeah, 100%. I very much agree with that, Lawrie. Yeah, and that cross-sector working. I think it's really clear from the presentations today where those clear threads of similarity or approach are coming in organically. Jules, did you want to come in?
Yeah, I have to say completely in agreement on the partnership, etc. But I think there's also a bit about removing the fear in terms of, I think there is a bit of a fear around the word gender and something, and kind of any sort of gendered lens. It's that kind of, oh, well, can I get that? How can I get that right? So I think that the more we can have these discussions that are bringing in all different kind of organisations and people around the table, I think that's really helpful. To show that it's not a scary place to be in. It's just, and actually, the more we have these discussions, the more informed we are, and and the less scary. Let's remove that. So I think there's a bit about that, and I think also in terms of the fear with the domestic abuse element of things, there is that, oh, but so much focus on women. And removing that fear, because actually, well, there's so much focus on women because we have this vast amount of research to demonstrate that we do need that focus. So that's there.
Yeah.
Put that worry to one side and let's just make the changes. So I think there's all those discussions needed to remove fear, and don't be scared to ask no questions daft. I think there's something on that too.
100%. Yeah, I really agree. And on that data point, Jules, and this is a question that's come in from Lawrie or Asiya, wondering what your initial motivation was to dig into that client data, because obviously you saw this trend jump out, and the majority of your clients are women. So was it that initial realization that then you dug in more, and just wondering about that moment, as you described, Jules, of do we approach this, do we dig into this, how do we go about it, and wondering how that came about for you, Lawrie and Asiya.
I'm happy to take this one, Lawrie, and you can jump in. So for us, historically at StepChange, a large proportion of our client base has always been women. But over time, I track sort of our data over time, and over time you can see a sort of gradual increase in the proportion of clients who are women. And for us, it just warranted further investigation. And largely it was an exploratory piece, and we realised a lot of us sort of have rough ideas of gendered aspects of debt, but nothing sort of substantiated was out there. So for us, it was a sort of to substantiate the sort of debt problems that women go through, and we just highlight them and have them down as actual figures, so people can sort of better understand the extent of the problem and hopefully work more towards solutions.
Great, thanks, Asiya. Lucy, did you want to come in?
Yeah, I'm just going back to the original question on kind of what we can do to bring, I think it was around sort of bringing gender into poverty solutions. Was that roughly? I haven't got a copy of the question, but and I was just reflecting on the presentation that it's a lot of information. It feels quite overwhelming. Even trying to approach this, I know me and Jules were like, how do we distill this huge area down into like a 10-minute presentation. And I think it probably, if you're quite new to this or it's an area that you've not worked on, that can feel really overwhelming. So what I was sort of trying to do with that demystifying slide, I'm not sure how much I managed to demystify, but is actually just to start small and just ask questions and start to think about whether you're working in a local service at community level or working in a policy team within Scottish Government. You know, what are we doing on gender? Who are the women that are coming into contact with our service? Do we have that information? And if not, why not? And what could we do differently? And I think there's really good examples of where services have kind of just taken that initiative to say, I'm going to hold a focus group or a survey with the women that come through to our centre at community level, understand their needs, and then take it from there. But also sharing that data, or I say data, it sounds quite formal, that information, those insights like StepChange have done today, it helps others then advocate for that change and say, look at what this area is doing. You know, they've really noticed this trend within people coming, you know, women coming to their homeless service. We should really look at that. So it's the more that people have these kind of micro or little conversations, it adds up to a bigger picture. And I don't think we should feel that, you know, every person working within, let's say, a health service, a homelessness service, needs to be on their own in it as well. Like, we should be linking up, working together in partnership, sharing, you know, whatever the level of information is that we've collected. If it's a survey with 20 women in your local area, that's still useful. It's still something that other people could tap into. So I think that's where the more work needs to be done as well. And we have a role in that as well. Like, Engender also doesn't provide services, but we need to be listening to what other groups are saying, what they're collecting, what they're finding out about the women in their local areas, and joining that up and integrating that into our work as well.
Yeah, very much so, Lucy, for sure. There's a really great practical question here on that resource sharing point from Madeline in the chat, and also thanks to Kirsten, who's already responded to it. Madeline asks, are there any resources for small third sector organisations or community groups that give guidance on how best to approach and empower women experiencing economic, financial abuse in rural communities? So asking for that like practical guidance or resources out there. Kirsten's responded with an example, but I wonder if our speakers have any other thoughts or organisations to point to, and if anyone else does in the chat and could send some links, that would be fab. Great.
I'm just going to be a bit lazy and say, I will maybe just ping over some of the places I've kind of looked at, and
excellent.
Rather than giving you a big, nobody on a Friday afternoon, nobody wants just a big list of stuff, do you? But
Yeah.
we'll share some really useful links, so
yeah.
I can certainly add those into the presentation and then send that
Fantastic.
across.
That would be great. Thanks, Jules. We've all the presentations at some point today touched on the importance of intersectionality and not treating women as one homogenous group. And there's a question here from Rebecca of the Young Women's Movement. Rebecca asks, is there any evidence to suggest that young women, defined as 14 to 30, young women's debt, defined as 14 to 30 years old in the cost of living crisis differs from older women, 30 years older? Any thoughts on that from anyone? We've touched upon this maybe a wee bit, but.
Yeah, I'm happy to try and give this one a go. So I would say that generally there is a sort of more of an age trajectory when it comes to debt. So we see that, for example, younger clients are more likely to be in arrears with household bills compared to older clients. But I don't think this isn't really sort of gender specific. Although there are some sort of gender variations when it comes to household bills, with like women tend to be behind on more things like energy and water, whereas men are more likely to be behind on rent and mortgage. But I wouldn't say there is like a sort of age trajectory there. It's just, a gender age trajectory there. And then when we look at things like unsecured debt types, for example, relatively older clients are more likely to have unsecured debts like credit cards and personal loans, for example. And the main sort of point of difference with clients is that younger clients are more likely to have overdrafts. But again, I don't think that's specific to women. It applies to men as well. And I think it's just the sort of credit adoption that they use. And I would generally say that the correlation with age is a bit more stronger than it is with gender.
Just maybe add a little bit to that, Asiya. What we can kind of see by looking at our Scotland stats, with and filtering them by age. As Asiya said, much more likely to be behind on household arrears. It's also the living situation of younger clients. Men are much more likely to be living with family than women, especially for younger age groups. And a really good example of the essential bills Asiya was talking about, council tax. So 80% of women under 25 are behind in council tax. So that's far outstripping the figure for that is for all our clients. As an aggregated total, it's 30%. So massive issues there, and I'd be happy to meet with you and talk about that further and what our data can kind of show, particularly for younger women, because as Asiya says, that there's age does have a correlation, and we probably have, Asiya, don't we? I mean, we're in recent years, it's the age profile of our clients has shifted a bit as well, so that we're seeing more 20 and 30-year-olds than we were maybe 10 years ago when it was older age groups. And of course, those profiles can be quite different when you look at the age groups, but be happy to have further discussions about that with anyone who would like to reach out. I think it'd be a really interesting piece of work.
Thanks, that's great. Yeah, we'd be delighted to connect you with the young women's movement if they'd like to chat. Brilliant. Jules, did you want to come in there?
Well, just to say in general, certainly speaking to the women's aids groups across the country in terms of women coming forward with because of incidents of domestic abuse, that has the numbers are becoming much bigger in terms of younger women, and significantly younger women, sort of women in their teens than we'd ever seen before. So I think from that, we can draw from that there will be a correlation to the financial and economic abuse there. But I would also say that sometimes the solutions in terms of women trying to start things afresh with no digital footprint or no kind of financial footprint, the ask is to go further back in time, sort of pre a relationship. And when somebody's younger, then you've got no kind of starting point there. So that becomes a much more difficult. The solution isn't actually on offer there to them because there's absolutely no kind of starting point there. So it becomes the solution side of things becomes much more difficult in terms of the younger people. So maybe it doesn't quite answer the question there, but I think it's worth pointing out there that's another issue in terms of where we need to consider systems and how we navigate that for younger people.
Yeah, very much so. Thanks, Jules. Lucy's also just referenced in the chat here some research from the Scottish Women's Budget Group, which is worth looking at. But yeah, I think we can all acknowledge there's a lack of data there for sure. We've probably got time for one or two more questions. Thanks so much for Zali, forgive me if I've pronounced your name wrong, Zali, who's from Amina, joining us today, who we mentioned earlier. Amina are based in Scotland and do really fantastic work supporting BME women across the nation. And she wonders if we could touch on women with no recourse to public funds and economic abuse and debt, and specifically avenues to support them. I know we've touched upon this a wee bit already, but I wonder if any avenues to support or live campaigning work that's happening that we could speak to among ourselves.
I think we actually, as an organisation, we often do defer to Amina to lead on kind of what the key asks are. So I think in terms of, specific policy asks, it would be to reform the no recourse public fund status. That's something that we've got the UK general election coming up this year. We'll be joining, other calls in order to completely overhaul how that works. It shouldn't exist. It shouldn't be something that it has a gendered impact. We know that. And women's ability to access refuges, access services, obviously be able to work. So our main stance is that we take our lead from Amina on specific asks around what that should look like in Scotland in terms of mitigation. But I know from, again, this is me just kind of pulling from what I remember. So don't quote me on it, but I think, you know, the main thing that we look at is how we can mitigate up here. So obviously we can't get rid of no recourse to public funds as a reserved issue at UK level, but we can push local authorities and Scottish Government to put specific funding in place, or, you know, other services that would be able to be accessed by those women. So I think it's about not letting, you know, Scottish Government off the hook there and saying what are the different options available. And we do this with other forms of UK law that we can't change, like universal credit. That's why we push Social Security Scotland to, you know, have specific benefits that will impact women, because actually a lot of that is mitigation of the misogynistic design of universal credit. So when it comes to immigration and no recourse to public funds, I think we should be taking that same approach and really pushing for there to be kind of hardship funds available, or specific, you know, support set up within what we can do up here as well. So just needs to remain a political priority, definitely. I don't know, Jules, you might know a little bit more on this.
Well, I was just going to come in really in terms of one of the recent things we've been very involved in is we've been doing the Fund to Leave. So it's a pilot for over 5 local authorities. Women leaving an abusive relationship could apply for up to £1,000 across sort of 5 local authorities. And within that, we actually got agreement for that to be available for women with no recourse to public funds, which I have to say was an absolute punch air moment when that happened. And I certainly intend to use that as a precedent's been set as far as I'm concerned now with that fund. And okay, it was a pilot, but I think that will give us kind of leeway to really start to demonstrate it. We used the levers that, because a similar fund had been piloted in England and Wales with no recourse to public funds, so we should be able to do the same here, and that has worked in this instance. So I would urge other people to kind of push on that, but absolutely also echo everything Lucy's saying, because yes, this remains on our agenda and infuriates and causes us no end of need to push on a kind of daily and weekly basis at Women's Aid.
Yeah, 100%, Jules, and definitely agree. It's a punch in the air moment, yeah, for sure. Okay, I think we'll close up the Q&A there just now. And I'm going to pass back to Lucy just for our final Menti activity. Thanks, everyone. Thank you to our panelists.
Brilliant, thank you so much. So if you can humour me again, I don't know if Jade, you can copy the Menti link back into the chat. You should have hopefully still got it open from earlier, but I'm just going to share my screen and take us through the last couple of questions that we've got. So let's present. Okay, great. So I'd like to come back to that statement from earlier, which was, I feel confident on how to link gender inequality to work on poverty. So rate yourself now compared to obviously when you started. I don't think we've got every single person that was still here, that was here at the start of the webinar, but we can get a rough feel to see if that 3.8 has changed. So I'll let a few more people respond. And again, the link's just in the chat, so please click through there. What about 11 of you so far that's voted? 13 all. It does keep moving up and down. So we're at 4.1 and we started at 3.8. So it's a gradual change. It's getting higher, maybe with a few more responses coming through. Brilliant. So, I mean, we've seen that increase, which is really interesting from when we started. But I also think we're reflecting on the fact that, you know, we each had 10 minutes to try and cram in as much information as possible. So it's a real starting point. But I'm excited to see that there has been a little bit of progress, even just within an hour and a half of talking about this. And it just shows how impactful these conversations can be. And I hope that, again, this will be a real jump off point for a lot of you to keep doing this within your work and connecting on this. And then we just wanted to take a minute to ask for your feedback and your thoughts. Obviously, in a webinar, it's quite strange. We can't see you. We can't really hear from you when you're asking questions. But we'd really love to hear your feedback, any kind of takeaways or a key message that maybe you heard from one of the presenters that really struck with you. It could be, you know, a finding, it could just be a thought that you've enjoyed it. Please share your responses. It'd be nice to see a few of those, and you can keep adding to them, obviously, after the webinar finishes as well. Just any reflections, maybe something that you'll go away and do as a result of listening to these presentations. Yeah, surprising about that pension statistic. I think it makes a really strong headline in terms of that being the takeaway, but it's a piece of research that's come out from, I can link to that in the email afterwards as well. So that's quite a new piece of research. It's confirmed what people already thought was happening around that. So the 95% crossover between economic and domestic abuse, yeah, that's a really strong statistic to kind of go away with. The research data from StepChange, absolutely agree. I think it's such a powerful tool that the sector can use to keep advocating. So I think sometimes it's always that just anecdotal, which it shouldn't be, that should be enough. But actually when we have as much in our arsenal as possible to make these arguments, it's so helpful. Great webinar. Every speaker is an expert in their field. Thanks very much. Yeah, intersectionality and effect on women. I'm really glad that's been a strong point that's come through. That's really important to us. And women continue to be disproportionately affected by debt. Absolutely. 7 times to leave an abusive relationship and the knock-on effect. Yeah, a really strong message from Jules' presentation there. Brilliant. Well, there's no pressure for all of you to get your thoughts. I know sometimes people need to have a little think and you know, reflect on the session after the webinar, but we'd really love to hear your feedback. You know, please talk about the event, tell people about the work, link them to obviously the research from StepChange, the work that Scottish Women's Aid are doing. What me and Jade will do is also send around different resources so that you can obviously look at all of this and share this within your networks. And someone's just put there, I knew it was a big problem, but the data really brings it home. So I think that's a nice note to end on, actually, and I'll just stop sharing my screen there. Thanks for taking part in that as the last little bit of our webinar. And I'll just hand over to Jade to do a big close, but I just wanted to thank Jules, Lawrie and Asiya. You were absolutely amazing for coming along and giving up your time today. We really appreciate it. It takes a lot of preparation to put these presentations together. And yeah, just so appreciate kind of the work that you put into this. It's been a really, really interesting and insightful Friday afternoon. But I'll pass over to Jade for his kind of final comments.
Thanks, Lucy. Just echoing that, yeah, thank you so much to all our panelists, Jules, Lawrie and Asiya, and you, Lucy, for sharing your brilliant presentations. I thought it was such a wealth of really insightful and crucial data and information and reflections, and really wonderful to see that connection between sectors coming together as we talked about the importance of intersectionality and so on. A really great afternoon. So thank you all so much, but really thank you to everyone attending for taking the time out of your day to invest further in this issue and embed it into your work. That's really where the change comes from, right? And when we connect. So it's been great to share resources. Let's do that post-event. Someone's asked in the chat if we'll share the slides. We definitely will. Yeah, Lucy and I will follow up. So we'll share all the resources, links and slides with you. I would also be a terrible comms manager if I didn't mention that we are a membership organisation, Engender. So if you are not a member of Engender, we'd really love to welcome you. You can sign up on our website. Memberships come at different costs, or you can get a free membership code. Just drop me an email. My email is jade.steen@engender.org.uk. It's on the website. And we'd love to welcome you. So thank you so much again. I hope everyone has a really wonderful afternoon. Thanks.